panelists.
Hello, everyone. That was a nice dance routine. Thank you, Fitria. Got kind of sweaty. So can we call in okay, can we call in Ojasvi, Mohua, and Kasuni to the stage, please? Thank you. Anyone else? Moha, Katsuni? Okay. Hello. No pressure, except for time. Hello, nice to meet you. Here. Okay, we can move. Okay, so hello again, guys. Good afternoon. This is sort of the last panel discussion before the APRC call to action. So this is progress towards international peace, security in the Asia-Pacific region. And without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker who will be joining us online. Rainita Naik is the Human Rights and Development Lead at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Southeast Asia Regional Office. Her work is aimed at advancing the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development through a human rights-based approach and involves providing technical advice to UN country teams on integrating human rights in their activities and programs. So, Rainita, are you ready online? Okay.
I'm here. Yes, Ranjita. Hi.
Hi, Rainita. Oh, wait a second.
Because of the time issues, we'll first be hearing from Rainita, and then we will continue with some Q&As for her because she has to leave at 3:30. And after that, we'll continue with the presentation and Q&A for the rest of the panel.
I can arrange to stay on, Ranjita, so don't worry. We can take Q&A later. I'm okay to stay on longer.
Oh, that's great.
Should I proceed with the presentation?
Yes, please.
Okay. Can I share? Or will you share from there?
We are operating the presentation, Rainita. You can go ahead.
Okay, sure. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So welcome, everyone. I want to speak about the interlinkage between peace and human rights. If you click on this, please, there's a very short video I'd like to show you. Yeah, just click on the picture. Okay, never mind. Just leave it here. I'll just speak to it. I want to start by saying that you cannot enjoy your human rights without peace. And that is the crux of this video with the High Commissioner for Human Rights that I meant to show you. But the reverse is also true. You also need human rights to prevent conflict and to sustain peace. Grievances often result from a lack of enjoyment or a respect for human rights, and when left unaddressed, can deteriorate into violence and conflict, with increasingly narrow, costly, uncertain, or ineffectual options for their resolution. So what I'd like to say is that human rights violations are often both a precursor to and also a consequence of violence and conflict. And human rights promotion and protection can provide important solutions for addressing grievances peacefully and effectively. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so here are some pointers on progress, which I think will be useful for your stop, go, and continue approach, which I like very much. And I think here's where you will find the continue aspects. The progress we've had so far, I think, is one, the recognition that peace and security and human rights are really intrinsically linked. The other important step I see as a marker of progress is that we now have increased monitoring of human rights violations by activists, by NGOs, by the UN, and this can serve as early warning and can help us prevent further conflict. The other very important progress theme I see is the activism by young people such as yourselves. Activism on expanding the space for inclusion, activism on climate change, on economic inequalities. And all of this can help drive the agenda for change. And finally, please note that we have the emergence of international human rights norms and standards. And these are meant to guide states, that is government, but also all of us as civil society, as the UN, to help us promote and protect human rights. Next slide, please. Here are some of the challenges, and I think this is where you will find some of your pointers for where you want to stop things. The challenges I see: government's failure to comply with human rights norms and standards. Many of them have signed up to, most of them have signed up to a whole range of international conventions, treaties, and standards. And I think we are seeing a very real failure to apply them and put them into practice. Secondly, the suppression of civic space, freedom of expression, and association. How many times have we seen peaceful protests in many countries being mischaracterized as threats to national security or public order and harshly suppressed? And I think we've seen that very recently in some countries. Only through mobilizing and raising their voices can people advance change, stop wars, and end grave human rights violations. And it is the duty of governments to provide that space, including to young people and to young human rights defenders, many of whom I know are here today. Please also remember that young people are bearing and will continue to bear the brunt of economic crises and will also have to face the impact of the climate crisis. They will also have to come up with the solutions. This needs ideas and innovation, and importantly, space in order for young people to express themselves. The third is a rise in hate speech, discrimination, and violence against specific groups. And I would really like to see more and more young people rallying against this. The global economic crisis is something I referred to, economic inequalities, which are leading to insecurity and uncertainty. And finally, the triple planetary crisis. All of this has the potential for conflict, and we rely on increasingly on young people, youth groups, to take on these challenges. Next slide. And from this, I want to quickly move on to the recommendations. I think here's where you will find much of your go pointers. And I've divided this into two parts. So one is for young people, for the youth that are present here today and all of their constituents, and another for states, which is to say governments. For young people, I want to say, please reinvigorate the human rights agenda. Use the human rights standards, the work of the UN human rights mechanisms, and I've sent a whole range of resources that you can consult. And please emphasize the need for governments to demonstrate accountability. Second, please continue speaking up, educating, advocating, promote the linkages between development, peace and security, and human rights. And very important, please emphasize the universality of human rights. I think we are seeing a lot of backtracking there. Governments saying, oh, only some human rights apply to us, the others don't. And that notion really needs to be dispelled. And finally, please find ways to promote inclusion. Expand the spaces like these that we have here today, by including the voices of those, particularly young people, who face barriers in policy and decision making. So that was my message to you, to all the young people. For governments, and I hope you will put this in your call to action, governments need to protect and promote the full range of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights and comply with their international human rights obligations. Second, governments need to protect civic space. and ensure the protection of young human rights defenders. And finally, governments need to ensure the meaningful participation of young people, including those who face intersecting forms of discrimination, in all policy decisions that affect them. Next slide. And this is a video that I hope you can click on and show, please. If you just click on the image, the video should start. Or maybe I can do that from here, Ranjita.
Wait a second, we're working on it. Okay.
Today, we are faced with numerous difficult challenges: misinformation, hunger, increasing poverty, climate change injustice, attacks on people, offline and online. Are our rights fading? Where do human rights live? They live in each of us. We have the chance to know, claim, and defend our rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights still speaks to us all. Its 30 articles transcend values, cultures, and borders, declaring that we are all human and all equal in dignity and in rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights unites us. To counter the current attacks on human rights, we need stronger and broader alliances involving all of us: governments, human rights defenders, the media, everyone. This year, as we celebrate 75 years of the Declaration standing up for our rights, it's your turn. Find the rights that resonate with you, claim them, stand up for them. In dignity, freedom, and justice for all, stand up for human rights.
Thank you, Ranjita, and the audience, that's all from me.
Thank you so much, Ramita. What a wonderful video reminding us about the importance of human rights. And also, thank you for sharing your recommendations for young people and for states, that we can use as a basis to develop our call to action. So for the next speaker, I'd like to introduce you Soumya Agarwal. Soumya is the co-founder and CEO of Youth for Peace International, working on a vision to empower youth on conflict transformation, providing rehabilitation support to refugees, and advocating for meaningful youth engagement by implementing the YPS agenda. So Soumya also serves as a board member at Peace First to support and fund the work of young people globally, as well as she works with the United Network of Young Peace Builders as the Asia coordinator and manages the YCL program at the United States Institute of Peace. So Soumya, are you there?
Yes. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Perfect. I cannot see the room, but I'm curious to, okay, now I can. I'm curious to know how many in the room, how many young people know about what is Youth Peace and Security Agenda?
Raise your hand. Okay, a few. You've got a few. Can you see that?
No, I can't see, but if you can give me a bit of idea of number of people,
maybe 1, 2. Anyone else? 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, yeah.
Okay, so not like many of us. So I'll start with sharing a bit about what Youth Peace and Security Agenda is and how it was adopted, and the work we do around the YPS implementation and some of my recommendations for the same. So Youth Peace and Security Agenda was adopted in December 2015, and it particularly talks about recognizing the positive and important role that young people play in peace building processes, It's the first ever resolution that formalized the YPS agenda as a relevant political field. And interestingly, it was built upon the movement that was led by young people. So there has been some progress when it comes to implementation of it. But when we see the progress in Asia, then it's not as much, except in Philippines and Sri Lanka. So at UNOY, we have an Asia Youth Advocacy team where we actively work on implementation of it at national level. So we have been creating national coalitions on youth peace and security in various countries. And these coalitions are youth-led, and also some of them are in partnership with CSOs. These coalitions primarily work on building partnerships with governmental institutions and creating more awareness, producing research, and also building capacities of different stakeholders on how they can implement the YPS agenda. So we are seeing in the region that there has been a lot of youth movement when it comes to creating awareness, talking about the implementation, doing advocacy missions. But we are not seeing that other stakeholders are taking active role when it comes to the implementation of it. And considering this is one resolution that cannot be implemented in isolation, there has to be multi-stakeholder partnership, and there has to be like active role of the government when it comes to implementation of the agenda. So considering the current scenario, young people in the region are actively looking for the support. And when we say support, it's like support with like financial support, resources, access to decision-making spaces, and also like they want meaningful partnership. So some of my recommendations with regard to this is that there has to be accountability for the member states, and also there needs to be a rigorous yearly follow-up with member states on the progress of YPS agenda. Some of the progress reports that have been released and that are available in the public domain are not something that young people agree with, and they're very vague. So young people want that the young people should be engaged when it comes to the implementation of it, and also when it comes to the monitoring and evaluation part. Also, the second recommendation would be that we need to acknowledge, trust, and support the voices and leadership of young peace builders at national and regional level in the implementation process. So youth perspectives, leadership, and meaningful participations are essential, both the legitimacy and for the localization of this YPS agenda. We are seeing fragile trust that may have been cultivated through the global policy design processes, which can be easily overcome. So we need those spaces, and for that we can create some accessible and safe spaces for intergenerational dialogue between young people and political leaders and government officials, which are currently missing. So how we can have more of those intergenerational dialogues, and where which are facilitated in a way that there are no power dynamics played within the room. My third recommendation would be that we need to partner with youth-led and youth-focused organizations and recognize them as equal partners when it comes to national YPS implementation processes. And partnerships should be well funded uh, and youth should be seen beyond just volunteers. So these are some of my recommendations. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Soumya. That was a really good speech, and also just I really also like the recommendations you made, especially about trusting the voices of young people. In many cases, maybe we have a seat at the table at the decision making spaces, but we don't really get trusted a lot. And also your point on safe spaces for intergenerational dialogue. Now, I'd like to hand it over to my partner, Ranjita, to introduce our youth speakers for this session.
Thank you, Liu. Before moving on with the presentations from the youth speakers, we would like to take a brief Q&A session for the speakers themselves. And I would like to thank Rainita for emphasizing that human rights are universal and inalienable, and we should work on protecting and promoting human rights and urge the states to do it and to promote and protect the civic spaces. And to sum up Soumya's presentation also, she focused on the safe spaces and trusting the youth voices. So I would like to request the participants to be brief in their questions in this matter. And we'll be taking 3 questions, so collectively, and then we'll move on with the panelists for the answers. If you have any questions, I would like to request for facilitators as well.
Hi, thank you both so much for your sharing. It was very insightful. I have a question for Rainita. Two of your recommendations included promoting inclusion and expanding civic space and using UN human rights standards as youth to advocate for them, right? But as I think all of us in the room are aware, as people who live in the Asia Pacific region, not all of us live in countries where civic space is really afforded to us, not just as youth, but just as people living in these countries. And then with that, and given the current geopolitical situation across the world where UN human rights standards and the declaration are just being completely ignored, and rulings in the ICJ are also completely ignored and almost useless at this point, how do you suggest we move forward with UN human rights standards, frameworks, and how do we continue to advocate for human rights in a way that is actually effective, given this current context?
Would you like me to take that first, or do we have more questions? Okay, maybe I'll take that one then.
Hello. Hi, Rainita. We have 2 more questions.
Okay, go ahead.
As I was reading the Pact for the Future document, there was a mention about the Peace Building Commission, if I'm not mistaken. Can you explain more about the mandate as it builds on national capacity, and how can young people as peace builders build that national capacity?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that too well. Could somebody repeat that? Or was it for me, the question?
As I was reading the Pact for the Future, there are some mentions of the Peace Building Commission. Can you explain more about the mandate? And it actually builds national capacity somewhere about. So how can young people build their national capacity as peace builders?
Okay, I want to ask, maybe my question still related the first question about the political situation in Asia Pacific. As you know, in today's era, even after post-COVID-19, there were several student activists, young activists who are passionately focalizing about situation are being detained or are being jailed because of their expression. How does the UN human rights see this as a part of the human rights threats?
Thank you for your questions. All the questions are, I think, directed to Rainita. So, Rainita, I would request you to go ahead with your answers, please.
Thank you. Thank you for these questions. All of them very relevant and very appropriate. Completely agree that the space, civic space in the region is shrinking, has been shrinking for a long time, and there are repercussions for people who speak out. I think what can help us is to see how we can, one, get bigger coalitions with us in which we make space for people from all kinds of groups and facing different kinds of challenges. One is that. Two is to really look closely at the recommendations made by human rights mechanisms pertaining to specific countries and specific themes, and to amplify them. Amplify them through the media, in discussions such as these, in any communications that are made to the authorities and to governments. Look, there are certain obligations and commitments that governments have made, and they have ratified a whole range of conventions. What you can do as a domestic constituency is to see that what is pledged and promised at the UN, in all those summits, in all those, as part of those conventions, is translated back home. So to work with CSOs, to work with human rights lawyers, and to assist them with making these and really amplifying some of these recommendations, to see how they can be translated into policy and into laws, to really advocate for changes in laws, for the adoption of certain laws, for the elimination of certain laws. And I completely agree. It is not easy. In fact, it is getting more and more difficult. I think the answer lies in really finding your coalitions, finding people, like-minded people who will be able to speak up jointly. That is one. I think the third question was sort of similar with regard to the lack of space. I think the SDG, the Sustainable Development Agenda, is also a really good opportunity. States have agreed to achieve a number of goals by the year 2030. The SDGs, the Development Agenda, also has very close linkages with human rights, with peace and security. And one way to push some of these agendas is to really link them to the SDGs, to say that none of the SDGs can be achieved if we don't pay attention to some of these human rights issues. If we don't have the right to associate freely, if we don't have the right to freedom of expression, how do we then go about achieving some of the goals on health, water and sanitation, on social protection, and really the whole range of development issues? So it is important to really emphasize this connection as well, the peace and security, development, and human rights, and to see how you can make sure that you speak about those being interconnected and interrelated. That is one. The second question on the Pact of the Future, sorry, it was still very unclear, and I couldn't hear what it was about, but I understand it was about national capacity, and was it related to the youth agenda in the Pact of the Future?
It was actually about the mandate of the peace-building agencies in the Pact of the Future, Rainita.
Right. I'm not very familiar with this particular agenda in the Pact of the Future. I do know that there is a strong emphasis on youth action and collective action. So yeah, I'm not very clear on the national capacity that you're referring to. Sorry, I'll need to look at that separately. But maybe some of the other panelists might have a response to this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rainita, and emphasizing that once again, human rights are very interconnected, and one right cannot be fulfilled in violation of another right. Indeed. So if we have any other question for Rainita, we can take one more question before she leaves us, and then we can go ahead with the session.
Yeah, sure. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Greetings of peace, each and every one of you.
My question is, what is the UN Office of Human Rights doing to protect the human rights of the Palestinian people? What can we do as young people in our own country do to help the Palestinian people? Thank you.
Rainita, you're currently on mute.
Sorry. Very good question, and I'm sure it's been on a lot of people's minds. If you look at the website of the Human Rights Office, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, you will see a range of statements, urgent alerts, reports, and monitoring reports by the UN Human Rights Office on the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories. So I would really encourage you to look at that. In fact, with regard to that situation, you will see that, especially if you're on social media and elsewhere, you will see a whole range of continuous, regular monitoring by nearly every UN agency that is on the ground and in headquarters, making, urging one, peace, urging a halt in hostilities. And so really, please look at some of those statements and you will see a lot of information there, including direct calls to governments, not just the governments involved, but to the international community as a whole, asking for, calling for a stop to the hostilities and for the protection of the rights of all the people in that region. And as young people, again, I think while spaces are difficult within our countries, it is, again, important to really amplify the messages that you're seeing out there, to amplify the messages from our office and the whole range of UN agencies that have been calling for peace and an end to hostilities, to really reach out and, like I said, form coalitions. And I think we are seeing that in many of our countries. CSO initiatives where, it might only be a show of solidarity, but I think at this point, every little bit counts. And to, keep urging governments to be involved in some way, to call for what is clearly a very difficult situation and end to the hostilities in that region. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rainita. Thank you for being with us as well. Now we will move on with the session, and we have our youth speakers with us. The youth speaker will be speaking focused on SDG 16 on peace. It has been actually 24 years since the UN Resolution 1325 was adopted, which emphasized on the participation and important role of women and girls in prevention and resolution of the conflict, peace negotiation, peacekeeping, and peace building, as well as humanitarian action in the post-conflict context as well. Very recently, in April 2024, the UN Resolution 5517, which was adopted unanimously, once again focused on the role of the youth in peace building and how their meaningful participation and safe participation is important. It also recognized the involvement of youth-led organization and peace builders in the peace processes, as well as encouraged the states to acknowledge and support the role of women and youth-led organizations. It also focused and emphasized on full, equal, meaningful participation of youth in strengthening and promoting the culture of peace. So we know like how focused and how dedicated UN itself is in having youth participation in the peace process and peace and conflict scenarios. And in this context, our youth speakers will be speaking on the interconnectedness of youth and peace and interlinking it with other issues. So let me introduce our speakers to you first. The first speaker we have is Ms. Ojaswi Casey. Ojaswi Casey is a lawyer specializing in human rights and serves as a human rights officer at Human Rights and Justice Center. She focuses on capacity building for stakeholders to support survivors of gross human rights violation, as well as litigation and advocacy. Her interests include women, peace and security, reparation, and international human rights law. Ojaswi will be speaking on the issue of young people in peace and security today. Over to you, Ojaswi. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. As we gather here today, let's remember that the world population, half of the world population is under 30, so yay. And in that, 23% still lives under the conflict-affected regions. This highlights, focuses on that how much important this is to discuss, but most of the issues that have been revolving around peace building initiative has always been discussed about the senior leaders, especially in my country where over the 50 years old man is still considered as a youth leader. And this has overshadowed, I think, am I audible at the last? Okay. So the UN has recognized this urgency, which has already been mentioned by Ranjita Didi and our previous speakers. In 2015, this was firstly recognized by the UN Resolution 2250, which was also highlighted by Soumya. In this, 5 key areas were focused. One was participation, protection, prevention, partnership, and disengagement and reintegration. This later again was highlighted in UNHCR 55/17, where the role of youth as an active change makers was highlighted. However, with this all importance, still the UN resolution has not been working in the country, especially in Asia Pacific region. Like my own country, which has gone through a decade-year of internal armed conflict, the youth are still not been focused, and they've not been provided any opportunity to stay in the peace-building dialogues. However, let's not keep our hope. Let's keep our hope. We've made this progress, and the UN has recognized it. We've already focused how challenging it is for the region to implement the international standards. There are other challenges also. The age limit of youth is still not been determined. The latest report from the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders remind us of all the legal and social barriers young defenders still faces. As we strive towards SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institution, the role of youth is vital. So what's next? What should we do? Can we go to the next slide, please? We need to create inclusive spaces for meaningful youth engagement, considering their intersectionality identities. We must strengthen legal protection and use data to address the challenges they face, especially in active conflict zones. Let's also build their capacity and advocate for their work with strong institutional support. What needs to stop? It's time to end the exclusion of young people from decision-making process. We must stop age biases and stop overlooking their contribution to peace building. Their engagement should be meaningful, not tokenistic. Even though we are invited to discuss in the decision-making process, it more look like a token rather than a really meaningful engagement. What must we continue? We must continue empowering youth with resources and leadership opportunity. It's crucial to push forward with implementing UNHCR resolution. And this can only happen when each of our states start creating national action plan. We should also achieve strengthened collaboration to achieve SDG 16, where the NGOs and civil society that has been helping the young leaders, they should also be supported. So by taking these steps, we can ensure that young people are not just heard, but are leading the way toward a peaceful and secure world. So here's to the peaceful world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ojasvi. Now, keeping the time in mind, I would like to invite our next youth speaker, Ganga Rathanayake, who is currently working as project coordinator at Women's Education and Research Center. Our next speaker is Ganga, please. And she is currently pursuing a master's degree in development studies and have been working on advocating for gender equality and promoting peace. I also request the youth speakers to be concise in their presentation. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm audible, right? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'll be speaking about the connection between SDG 5 and SDG 16, challenges and strategies for youth engagement. And here, as you all know, that SDG 5 and 16 focus on vast areas. Here in this presentation, my focus is for gender equality in the context of women empowerment, along with peaceful and inclusive societies. Let me explain the connection between these two goals. In my point of view, gender equality is, achieving gender equality is something that building a society where everyone, regardless of gender, can contribute to peace and security. In women's empowerment in decision making and conflict resolution, I think when women are empowered to take part in decision-making process, whether in the family or a community, that results, outcome are open, more inclusive and balanced. Let me get an example from Sri Lankan context. We had 30 years long civil war, and during this civil war, a lot of misplacement happened, and the Mothers Front was one of the group of women who demanded justice for their missing family members during the civil war in Northern Province. And their efforts brought attention to human rights and helped build peace in their communities. Now they are working with the relevant government authorities for peace and security. Then gender equality as a foundation for justice and a strong institution. Gender equality builds fair and inclusive institutions, ensuring everyone's needs and rights are represented. Again, in referring to Sri Lankan context, according to UN Women reports and ILO reports, in labor market, women are 27% less paid than men. There is a salary wage gap in between men and women. What my point is still gender-based. This is economic violence actually happening in Sri Lanka as well as some Asian countries. So by addressing this discrimination, society can protect right perfectly of all individuals, leading to a more equitable and more fair solutions in education, health, and other sectors as well. Here are the main challenges in integrating gender equality into peaceful and inclusive societies. The first one is highly influenced patriarchal norms and practices. So again, I'm referring Sri Lankan context that one of the main challenges we are facing in our country is that very low number of female religious leaders in religious sectors. That's because of the norms and practices are happening in the social context, because lack of community acceptance for the female religious leaders, like they are not openly coming to get power in not the power, that they are preventing take part of the religious initiatives because of the social norms and non-acceptance in the society. And again, another challenge is socio-economic inequality and access to the resources. As I mentioned before, in the labor market, there is a salary gap when it comes to the men and women. And also in the educational initiatives also, in urban communities like Colombo in Sri Lanka, there are developed educational initiatives for women as well with the technology. But when it comes to the vulnerable communities like northern and eastern province, rural communities, there are less access for women also for developed educational initiatives. And here I'm recommending some strategies for enhancing gender equality into peaceful and inclusive societies. We can promote youth participation by creating platforms for youth, especially for young women in vulnerable communities. And also we can engage them into peace building and decision making processes that ensuring their voices are heard and valued. Then we should stop ignoring gender specific needs. We can develop and implement policies that address the unique needs of women in conflict and post-conflict setting, recognizing the different impact of conflict on gender. And then we can continue educational initiatives. We can invest in educational programs that focus on gender equality and peace building, particularly targeting young people to build a foundation for future inclusive and peaceful societies. Here is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ganga, for your presentation. Indeed, ignoring the gender-specific need is also against the essence of the UN Resolution 1325 that we were talking about earlier. Now we have another youth speaker, Mahua Zareen, who is the Executive Director and founder of Disability Pride Bangladesh. She is working for disabled women, girls, and young people's right awareness and mental health issues, of whom are facing gender-based violence, domestic violence, and on the issues of empowerment and gender equality issues. Mahua will be speaking on the topic disability, gender-based violence, and gender equality from the perspective of SDG 16. Over to you, Mahua.
Am I audible? Thank you. I'm very much nervous, so if I did any mistakes, please forgive me. Forgive me. Sorry. I am Mahua Zareen Rushni from Bangladesh. I work with an organization which name is Disability Pride Bangladesh. My title of working is Disability, Gender-Based Violence, and Gender Equality. Context. I am working right now in the context of our Bangladesh context. That's why I mentioned my presentation with that context. In Bangladesh, disabled women, girls, young people are faced significant challenges and the frequently marginalized in society. Despite of advance in human rights and gender equality, these people are frequently denied basic rights, face various forms of violence, including gender-based violence and domestic violence. The intersections of disability and gender increase their vulnerability, make it difficult for them to obtain education, healthcare, and employment opportunity, as well as fully participate in society. The lack of awareness about their rights, combined with social stigma, frequently result in their exclusions from decision-making process that have a direct impact of their life. Moreover, these individuals' mental health is frequently neglected and they face isolation, discriminations, and limited support of systems. So what we are doing? We are creating awareness and support mental health to let them know about their proper rights and law, empowering through skill development training, arranging seminar, events, webinar, targeting young generations to create capacity building, helping them to get wages card from government for disabled people. We all know we are an underdeveloped country. So in our country, what are the progresses is happening that I'm just going to highlight. Before 2010, there is no law act implemented in Bangladesh for women and also disabled community. But in 2010, the gender-based violence and domestic violence under Act Prevention and Protection 2010 and Right and Protection of Person with Disabilities Act under 30 was implemented in our country. increase awareness and advocacy. Increase awareness and advocacy in the terms of around 2,500 NGOs and so many youth-led organizations coming forward. As example, WDDF, Prerona Disability Pride Bangladesh, which is Space Bonneshik, and many, many more. Nowadays, people are very much knowing about the disability, and they are aware about it. So nowadays they started to reserve seat in public transport for disabled individual and getting minimum wages from government. But also that beside it, it creates gaps too. Limited implementations and enforcement. The implementation of this law remains very, very weak still now. The judicial system often struggle to handle cases involving women with disabilities, which causes to delay and dismiss of gender-based violence related cases. Lack of opportunity, lack of training, research, information, guidance, participation become a biggest barrier to youth. The wages what government paying the disabled individual is very less to sustain. It should be increased immediately. The challenges: proper implementations of freedom of speech and practice of democracy. Less educational facilities, economic dependency, increased gender-based violence and limited their ability to live abusive life. Limited financial resource, poor donor dependency, and short-term project funding have all the impact of their implementations of program and service that address gender-based violence and promote gender equality to disabled individuals. From our work sessions, we recommend that what should be started. A clause must be added in our existing act that a disabled individual or women who are facing gender-based violence and domestic violence must get the full free legal assistance by the government. The judicial system should be made more accessible and responsive to the need of disabled individuals, ensuring they can easily report violence, discriminations, and wage-related grievances. Government and policymakers make sure freedom and speech and democracy to the youth and community for international security and peace. What should be stopped? Youth potentiality, creativity, initiative, thinking, and demand should not be disrespected and dominated. Discrimination must be stopped in employment sectors and wages to ensure equal pay and opportunities for career advance and achievement for disabled individuals. What should be continued? Structured creative skill developed training session as well as capacity building training should be full funded by the government in order to increase institutional and individual opportunities for youth, women, and the people with disabilities. Disability wages must be increased from 720 BDT from the 5,000 BDT as per month. Various NGOs should be continue based on long-term project work so that we can change our present situations for disabled communities. Thank you all.
Thank you, all the youth speakers. You highlighted a very important point, like be it the countries like Nepal or Sri Lanka, which has already gone an internal violent conflict, or be it the country like Bangladesh, which is always at the risk of conflict because of the socioeconomic disparities, the cultural disparities, and the failure to take into consideration the youth voices has always been there, be it in the for the countries that are risk of conflict or the countries that has gone through the conflict are in the post-conflict phase. So let's keep in mind that the pillars of youth participation in the conflict and post-conflict, or even to prevent the conflict, we should take the youth voices into consideration, have their safe and meaningful participation, and we should also take youth participation seriously and not in a tokenistic approach. With this, I would like to thank all the speakers and panelists. Thank you very much. For the Q&A, keeping the time in mind, I would like, I would encourage you to talk to each other. It will also be a good way for us to network with each other. You can approach the panelists from this panel and the earlier panel, and you can talk with each other, and let's mingle beyond our country cluster as well. Now we'll break for tea for 15 minutes and we'll be back here. Thank you so much.